Hello, Spark fans, and welcome back to Advancing Spark. So I'm kind of overdue. I was meant to do a video per month and say, here's all the news coming from Databricks, here's the release notes, let's have a walkthrough and see what's happened on the platform, on any new runtimes, and all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, end of May, it was the Data and AI Summit, and there's all sorts of crazy news flying in from absolutely everywhere. So consider this your delayed news broadcast for this is what's happening in Databricks across May, and we'll take a step through everything else that got snuck out. Now, obviously, there's some big ticket items, but we've talked about live tables and feature store and all these other bits and pieces. So we'll focus on the other little bits, the incidentals, the other things that's going on. And obviously, we'll work out videos for the big new features when we can and when it's appropriate to share, I guess. So if you're new around here, do not forget to like and subscribe. Let us know down in the comments which bits of all these different little bits of features actually make a difference to you, which bits you're looking forward to, and we'll go from there. Let's have a look. Okay, so I have dove into the Azure Databricks release notes. I'm going to ignore the ones that are in June because we'll do a June roundup and no point in repeating ourselves. So let's have a look what's in here. So, I mean, a few things. Again, we're expecting a little bit of overlap, some repeats. So yes, we've got the new ML persona. Now, you'll have seen personas either last week, week before, and that's if you log into Databricks now, there's a little button at the top and you can say, I want to switch from my normal data science and engineering into my ML persona and into my SQL persona if you've got Databricks SQL enabled. And that's going to be the way they're doing things now. You've got different flavors of Databricks and you can switch the different views. And there's some overlap, some of them do the same things, but it's kind of just which menus you want to see and which features you want to have access to. So they've now got that. Obviously, in the ML side, we're seeing the new features. So you've got your experiments page, and that goes into various features of ML Flow. Got AutoML, that is the new automatic notebook generating thing, which gives you lots and lots of control and insight into the models it's building for you. And you've got Feature Store, that super interesting API layer about exposing features and making some of the core building blocks of what goes into an ML model reusable, repeatable, transferable across various different people. And that's super interesting. But we'll skip that. That is another session. SQL Analytics is renamed to Databricks SQL. Now, I'm actually really happy just to see that in the release notes because I thought I was going crazy for a little bit. Because certainly everything in Data and AI Summit was like, it's called Databricks SQL. Of course it's called Databricks SQL. It's always been called Databricks SQL. What are you talking about, SQL Analytics? We've not seen that. What, are you mad? Yeah, no, good. It's definitely been renamed. we all know it's been renamed now. SQL Analytics has been renamed as Databricks SQL. So if you've been hearing about SQL Analytics, and even further back, if you're hearing about that Redash, the separate dashboarding company that Databricks acquired, then that is all now bundled up inside what will now be referred to as Databricks SQL. So if you see that term, that's just what that is. Also interesting is that's got its own release notes now. So as that matures and as it grows and as it gets more and more stuff, we'll see more and more details going into there, hopefully. One slight note, if you are like me, nerding out and trawling through the release notes, we've got all of our release notes held over here. So we've got kind of platform release notes, we've got the various different runtimes, but your Databricks SQL release notes are held under the Databricks SQL bit. So just fragmented parts of notes and news and things, but not the end of the world. We can get to it, which is all good. Okay, Delta Live Tables, again, they've been announced. We talk through kind of what they are. There's loads of things to do with testing and lineage and chaining of stuff and basically managing all of your engineering-y stuff for you. And we'll be looking at that in a lot more detail. Okay, so non-new feature news. Azure Spot VMs are now GA. So I've been using Spot VMs. Again, that's the thing where you can say, you know what, I want to use low priority VMs. I want to pay a lot less for my VMs, but I want to accept the risk that occasionally I might lose it and it'll restart and I'll get a different VM in standard pricing. But if you're running like overnight ETL jobs and you just don't mind if occasionally one of the workers blinks out and then another worker comes and replaces it, and actually Spark just manages that for you, it's a super money-saving thing you can do for those jobs that, you know, it might take a tiny bit longer because it's occasionally swapping out a cluster node, a worker. Really, really good. Really super glad they're GA, so that is awesome news. There's a couple of things to do with encryption. So when you're managing data within Databricks, if you want the data that's stored within the Databricks storage accounts and within the Databricks control plane to be encrypted using your key, not a key that's managed by Databricks themselves, you can now do that. And that's just kind of making it a little bit more accessible to lots of kind of enterprise security kind of things going, no, we're not allowing Azure to manage the key. We want to manage the key using our corporate policies. We want to cycle it every 5 days, 10 days, 30 days, whatever it happens to be. And essentially just plumbing it into a wider security process. You can now do that. So again, you can bring your own key, you can store it in Key Vault, and you can hook Databricks up and say, go get that key and use it to encrypt all of my stuff, which is interesting. Mainly just making sure you can get through the hoops of various different security teams and kind of physical architecture teams when deploying a new Databricks workspace. Okay, managing where notebook results are stored. Again, it's an interesting one because it's not one that you normally kind of think of. So when you're thinking about what Databricks is, you've got the control plane, essentially the Databricks workspace, which is managed entirely by Databricks, lives off in Databricks land. And then you've got the actual managed resource group where you have Databricks storage and you've got your own lake and all that kind of stuff that you're hooking into it. So you've got kind of actual user data and storage, and then you've got like system data and all of that kind of stuff. And designing where notebook results get stored, just a little bit more configuration to say, actually, I don't want results stored over there. I want to put it in here in my storage where I can go and see it. So just you've got some control about how you can go and get in there. Again, more control just to make sure you configure it in a way that actually matches what you're trying to do from a security point of view. It's great. So all of those are in previews. They are fairly new features being able to get down to that lower level, but great. Yeah, support for Databricks Runtime 7.4 is ending. So that's an interesting one because that was on one of the longer term support. It wasn't a full LTS, but it was kind of given extended support lifecycle. And again, it's been a long time, and Databricks are on this relentless path again. Just a break, keep moving, keep with the latest runtime, and you'll be fine. And yes, obviously that does have issues in terms of library compatibility. I'm a little bit blasé. I have been a little bit blasé in past videos about which runtime you should be using, but there's just loads of benefits for being on the later ones. So even if it means you're challenging which libraries you're using and you're having to figure things out, it's good to kind of try and stay on a regular cadence so you can be taking advantage of all the new features as they're coming in. And finally, repos users can now authenticate using personal access tokens. So certainly when you're trying to authenticate with Azure DevOps, there's loads of kind of issues in terms of trying to get it to authenticate with a username and password. You can set up that one thing and try and get it to work across. And certainly there's lots of tenant issues. So if the tenant that the Azure DevOps was sitting in wasn't in the same tenant as your DevOps workspace, then it just they wouldn't talk to each other. So I've not tested it out with the token. I'm hoping that using the personal access tokens means we can access any Azure DevOps account and not have to have them aligned in the same tenant. I'll have a look at that and I'll let you guys know, but we'll see. So that's it. That's all the news that was there. And obviously some of them are big, chunky, we've invented an entire new platform kind of things. One thing I was fairly surprised to see, we just jump at the kind of the wider release notes, is normally we've got, here's the new beta runtime as one of the things inside our release notes. We didn't have it in May. I'm assuming that was just missed out because we do indeed have a new beta runtime. So 8.3, currently in beta, you can go and have a play with it. And that's got a load of features of its own. So we're going to have a quick skim through that as well. So in 8.3, you get a few things. Generated columns in Delta tables. Now, we covered this very, very briefly, talking about the recap from the Data and AI keynote. So once Delta went to 1.0, one of the key features for this generated columns. And it's kind of like having a calculated column in a SQL server. So it just means you can say, actually, whenever someone queries this, just work out these other columns based on the data. Don't store the data. Don't materialize this column down on disk and take storage space and take compression to write it and all that kind of stuff. Put the problem on read time, automatically generate a column when I'm doing it. The specific use case they use is when you're doing things like partitioning, which is interesting to see how that's working out on the fly, which partition it goes into. Because so many patterns that I currently use, we take a timestamp and then work out the year and the month and then the day, and we use that for partition folders, or rather kind of the year month, and the year month day. So yeah, definitely interesting that we can now do that, and it just gives us more options about how we can have things that are generated on the fly, generated each time rather than hard coding. Yeah, interesting things. I've not tried it being sneaky and doing that because we can use a SQL function. I don't know if we can do a lookup, and so it just looks it up on the fly. Don't know if that'd be any good. Would that be horrendously slow? Don't know. Loads of things we can do. So autoloader. has a load of more stuff. And we've seen this as a general pattern. So when there's new things to do with how do I get data into my system, new things to do with schema drift and engineering and data quality management, all that kind of stuff, tends to be going autoloader first. So there's a load of new things we're seeing in autoloader just to kind of just improve it, improve speed, improve the engineering functionality. Be interesting to see how that ties into live tables, because I'm expecting the two should mesh. Don't know yet. So what can we do? So schema inference for CSV files. Again, so we saw that was coming in, we saw that kind of coming in with the last version of autoloader. We can do more and more stuff. Things like having a rescue data column that was previously just JSON. Now got more and more options to say, just dump that in there, treat as unparsed data. We can now do schema merges, which is good. Different ordering of columns across files is a huge one. So certainly one of my clients have had that issue where they just get different columns each time. And they really struggle with autoloader because it has to have that fixed schema at the start. So actually saying, you know what, it's fine because it's just a different order and we can work that out on the fly based on inferring it from the header each micro batch and then merging it into the right state. So that is fairly huge in terms of how some people can use it. So it's very good. Improved startup time. So essentially kind of just making it a little bit quicker. Occasionally there is a little bit of time when it's going and checking things and checking RocksDB and checking the state and creating records and doing all that stuff. And they just streamline that, which is really nice. It's good. Faster directory listing, which is interesting. So that was one of the performance improvements they're looking to try and do for some of the initialization of autoloader. And with autoloader, you've got the option to turn off the notifications. So actually, I don't want it to use event grid and a queue and all that kind of stuff. Just treat it like traditional file streaming. List out the directory, list out what I've loaded before, find the ones I haven't loaded and push it through. And if that's going quicker, then that does simplify the architecture of having messages in a queue and having to give elevated privileges to be able to create those Azure objects. If it's actually that much more efficient, that could be really easy. But again, not had a look in there, not had to dig into exactly what that looks like. But again, more options, more flexibility is always good. They've made the checkpoints easier. They've done some cleaning. So certainly if you're leaving autoloader just running for months and months and months and months, that checkpoint folder will get huge with all the many offsets it was doing. And so just having it clean itself up. The same as we saw with Delta tables, doing the checkpointing and truncating of the log and looking after the transaction log. It's kind of a similar thing, just making sure those autoloaded checkpoints are a little bit more looked after, a little bit more efficient over time. So good stuff. That's like low-level nerdy engineering stuff, but I've been doing loads of autoloader, so love it. Including a file path in a rescue data column when it's available. So that's interesting because file path just something I sling on every file I'm loading just automatically. So if I'm getting some kind of landing area and I'm bringing it into that initial layer of my lake, the pre-bronze in Databricks parlance, the raw in my parlance, whatever it happens to be, I'm always going to do a input source file kind of thing, just to tag on a metadata column and just kind of bung it in there. And now they're saying, well, basically, so this rescue data column is just going to automatically include the file path if it is rescuing data. So you've got that lineage for if it went wrong. So for me, I'm already trapping that, so I probably wouldn't use it. But yeah, interesting that they are looking for a system column already called file path. So maybe that's just a convention learning that we should all be using that naming convention for any file path auditing that we put in, just because then it all aligns and it's all the same thing. Another biggie. So file renames in ADLS Gen 2 has always been an interesting one. So basically, the way Spark's doing a lot of stuff, if Spark is moving files, certainly moving files within a blob store. So if I've got one virtual directory and a file in there, and I want to move it into another file so I can trigger another directory so I can trigger autoloader, then because actually the virtual folder in a blob store, it's just part of the name. And so you're not actually moving it. It's not creating a blob. It's not going to trigger a create blob activity when you move files within a blob store. That's actually just classed as a rename. And previously autoloader just wouldn't trigger blatant, but I don't care about renames. I'm only looking for blob create activities. So it gives us the ability to kind of move things around and have pre-processes and have various things that's happening inside of inside the blob store before autoloader will see it. It also means kind of there's some things I was doing when I was trying to kind of do a preprocessor in a landing area, but I was using Spark to do it. And Spark, when writing down into ADLS, was creating temporary files, and then it was only renaming it to .parquet. Whatever when it was finished. And so it wouldn't get picked up by autoloader because the create blob has a temporary file. I didn't have an actual file for the Parquet and blah, blah, blah. All sorts of problems, which that is going to help out with. So if you're doing some funny things in the source folder destination for autoloader, this is just more compatibility, more things to make sure it comes through properly. All good. Okay, right, other stuff. We mentioned last time that kind of Delta Game 1.0, they came with a load of new APIs to create tables. So again, just super useful if you're doing things like working in straight Python, you're working in C#, you're working in other programming languages, being able to get in and interact with Delta and not having to go through Spark to interact just makes it more accessible, makes it more widely spread. So they've kind of got a load of those things in there. They kind of create those as separate APIs you can use. So the analyze function when using SQL. So if you're trying to understand Delta tables, it's coming back the wrong, wrong size for tables. So they corrected that, which makes sense. And this is super interesting for me. So RocksDB. RocksDB is this new state store. Essentially, it's a key value pair database that they build into the checkpoints of structured streaming jobs. So if you're doing structured streaming, you're getting a load of data coming in. You can say, I want you to use the RocksDB state store, and it'll create this little mini metadata database inside your checkpoint folder structure. And then it uses that to work out. So I think you're using things like the copy command if you're doing copy into a Delta table, or if you're using autoloader, and I go, what files have I read versus what files do I not need to read? And it uses that to work out a lot of the state stuff, which is super useful. But you couldn't really get much info. You couldn't say what's happening inside there. How many files are in there? What's going on in there? So certainly kind of adding these new metrics, especially if you're using autoloader, means we can do a load more work and we can go and dig into it and understand what's happening inside that whole piece. Very, very, very good. So lots and lots of detailed stuff we can get. Let's see the kind of things that we've got. So we just get like a giant pile of metrics. Love it. I like metrics. Metrics are useful. Just to do that real kind of what's happening in my micro batches, what's happening in my different runs, to try and get that info and push it out so you can completely understand what's going on in your micro batches, what's going on inside everything. All good. Okay, enable bucketed joins. So bucketed joins was always awkward if you only had one side bucketed, so it added some additional stuff to allow you to do that. So you can kind of go and work out actually stuff how to shuffle stuff. I've not had a big deep play with actually the performance of this and see how it works, but certainly definitely kind of an interesting performance thing if you're not partitioning on a single value and you're saying bucket these ranges of values into partitions and you want to be able to join in it. Makes sense. Kind of there are some more optimizations coming there. This just makes me sad. So if you've looked at how you do things like row level security in Databricks currently, so you've got things like the isMember function. So I can do a lookup and I can do row level security by creating a view and saying check if the person querying it is a member of the value in the column, and then it checks it against the Databricks group. Am I a member of that group? If I am, positive. If I'm not, returns a negative. And I can use that to filter records on the fly. So I could get someone to go in and query it by country, and if I had UK and US in my list, and for me it just said UK, I would only see records in the UK. I wouldn't see the US ones because that filter would return 0. Great little pattern, works. Not the most sophisticated of row level security stuff, but it was nice. I only found out because of actually this announcement that previously you could actually just register a UDF that overrode the isMember function and then just get around the entirety of security. It just makes me sad. So you can no longer do that from 8.3. Now, honestly, the majority of times people are using row level security. That means they're using table access control, which means they didn't have access to write Python or register kind of thing. So it's not the end of the world. But yeah, not great that people could get around it if they knew Python. They were kind of they had access to a cluster that was enabled. So yeah. Oh no, you could do it in SQL. Oh, just makes me sad. So yeah, 8.3 you want to use if you're using row level security, and that will improve some stuff no end. They've got the updated Power BI connector, so there's more stuff that's going in there. Now we saw a new Power BI connector a good few months ago, so there's an even newer one. Removing things like batch size is going to be managed a bit for you. Better support for Unicode, and as it says, minor improvements in query generation. So query generation is when we are essentially Power BI. You're doing a load of like sort of Power Query, you're adding some filters, you're doing all that kind of stuff, and you want it to query fold. You want it to kind of turn that into a query that then passes back, and you let Databricks sort out actually resolving that query and the joins and the filters and the aggregations and all that kind of stuff. Essentially, you're saying, let the Spark engine do the work. And again, always better if that query is a better formed query so it performs better. Okay, some R stuff. Again, I know you can now do multiple results per cell, which is what we saw in Python kind of a good few months ago. Super useful to do multiple displays, and so you can actually pile up a load of stuff which tries to kick out multiple results. It's useful. Again, not an R guy. And then there are some library updates. There's a load of stuff going in there. Again, Koala's updated, Panda's updated, and there's some bugs. Again, I recommend you have a look through those yourself, see what makes sense to you, see if there's any that you've been waiting for. Again, few interested ones in there, but they're fairly low level. Whew. Okay, so huge amounts of stuff actually. So we've seen a few of those Databricks runtime releases that had like 1 or 2 big ticket things, and then some libraries. It's quite an interesting amount of the number of different things that are in there. Loads of them to do with improving streaming, making streaming faster, making autoloader faster. Well, which is again kind of pushing that march towards just treat everything like a stream. Even if you're only loading it once, you can use trigger once, and then it still streams the data. Now, as I've said many times, there are complexities in doing that. Some things you do in a batch job that you wouldn't necessarily do if you're now suddenly streaming. But yeah, more and more benefits to do with schema drift, to do with automatically managing data, to do with doing that, managing different changing piles of data as they come in, and doing it gracefully in a way that doesn't break and just continues. Lots of cool stuff in there. And that's what happened in May, right? See, not much to talk about, and then obviously there's Unity Catalog and the other improvements to Photon and all the other stuff that we talked about during the summit. So tons and tons and tons of stuff going on. At least 8.3 currently in beta. You can go and have a play with it now. And again, all those platform release notes, because they normally come in, like you might be a week or so delayed before your platform actually gets those updates that we're talking about. But we're now 8th of June currently, so everyone should have all those announcements that we talked about should now be there, even if it's just at a preview state. So loads of good stuff, loads of interesting stuff. Certainly going to be talking to some clients about those auto-loaded changes and about how they can turn and play with some of those things. It's definitely an interesting improvement for how things work. Alrighty, and with that, I will leave you there. As always, do not forget to like and subscribe, especially if you're new around here. Hello, welcome, thanks for joining. And yeah, let us know down in the comments. Any of those mean anything to you specifically? Any of those fix a problem that you've been having and you're like, I can now remove that big hacky bit of code I was using to work around the lack of that stuff? Are you going to breathe easier by some of the metrics, some of the improvements, some of the changes to how RocksDB works, all of that good stuff? Let us know down in the comments. Otherwise, I will leave you alone and I will catch you next time. Cheers.